I had a very profound response this week. I was working on an experiment where I was generating white noise on my phone and turning the volume up loudly while filming with my Sony Handycam as I used the phone as a sort of spirit box. Afterwards, I filtered the recorded footage with the artificial intelligence software, and it removes the white noise and leaves the replies. Halfway through the session, I asked to hear heavenly music. I've asked 3 other times in the last 4 months, and they said they could play this music for us, but I never heard anything in the previous sessions. Again this time, the voice replied, "I can." A few minutes later, as I was about to end the session, the voice said, "Trying something new." Of course, I can't hear the voices in real time, as I have to filter it first. So I thanked them for their time and ended the session. I turned off the web page that was generating the white noise, and all of a sudden, a sound resonated from the phone that I can only describe as a clarion bell ringing out. At the time, I stopped and exclaimed, "Oh, is this the heavenly music I asked for?" It rang out for several seconds and then died out. I asked in awe, because the phone should not be making any sound at this point. "What is that sound?" The filtered response was the clearest of the session. God in heaven. I mean, that's pretty profound, don't you think? Some unknown being firstly communicates openly with me, from all of us to hear, and then proclaims we just heard God in heaven. First of all, I'd like to say that I'm not actually a very spiritual person. I had no paranormal experiences in my childhood, and I wouldn't consider myself physically gifted. However, my attitude changed during Corona. 2019 has been a very difficult year for me. I had hoped that things would get better in 2020 and pushed myself through the year with all my might. And then the pandemic came. I remember realizing that I just couldn't do it anymore because I didn't have enough strength. And then this presence entered my life. I could feel that sometimes someone was there to stand by my side. I was also able to communicate with this spirit. When I was feeling bad, he was there. This spirit also helped me in terms of personal growth, and more than once gave me a push in the right direction. Since I never really had anyone to really take care of me, my parents hardly had time for me since I grew up with a brother with health issues. I found it great to finally have a mentor of sorts, even though I couldn't see my mentor. However, I had learned early on that there was no such thing as free lunch. I began to wonder what that spirit had to gain from helping me. I got a name and a face to the spirit, but it isn't someone related to me. However, I have read on the internet about similar experiences with this person. Partly the things correspond one-to-one to what happened to me, first contact and the like. I even once stumbled across a pop song dedicated to this person, and I found myself in the lyrics. And then I found Reddit in this community. I read a few stories and kept coming across warnings about demons, and honestly, it scares me. How do I know now if the presence I feel sometimes really means well with me? What goal do demons pursue? Are there any warning signs that help me distinguish benign from malignant spirits? My dad passed away 15 years ago when I was 26. At the time, my now wife, girlfriend and I had been together for 6 years, so she knew my dad well. He was only 52 when he died. It was horrible and tragic. My wife is 9 months pregnant with our first child. We started late and was due to give birth today by C-section. That's been postponed by now, but anyway. Last night, my wife and I were out walking our dog. During these times of COVID, we always cross the street rather than pass someone. But for some reason, when a man started walking towards us, neither of us moved across the street. I stress this guy looked nothing like my dad. As he approached, we had this exchange. Man, that's a handsome dog. What's his name? Me. Stanley. He loves it when people make a fuss of him. The man then crouched and made a fuss of the dog, which he loved. Man, he's a good boy. Locks eyes with me. So were you. Me. Cheers. Man. Anyway, I've got to go. He nods towards my wife's very pregnant belly. Just wanted to let you know, everything's going to be fine. Be lucky. He then walked away singing Always Look on the Bright Side of Life from the life of Brian. Two things. Be lucky is something my dad used to say very often, and it's how he would end every phone call. It's a common expression in the part of London my dad was from. We now live in Manchester. I haven't heard anyone say it since leaving London. It's not a common expression here, and the man had a local accent. I think the last person I heard say that was my dad. Secondly, The Life of Brian was my dad's favourite film, and we played that song at the end of his funeral. As we walked away, my wife said, "Well, that's weird." I started saying something like, "Coincidences can be really funny sometimes." My wife stopped me and said, "Just take it, babe. Don't try to explain it." We haven't spoken about it since, though I still feel very emotional thinking about it. This happened in 2011. My significant other and I had just moved to a new house. A house that I never liked, but he rented anyway. It was cheap. This house was the horrible vibe, like a haunted house. And I don't know if it's because I was overthinking things, or if what happened actually happened. One night, my significant other was downstairs watching TV, and I was upstairs taking a nap. At this point, it's important for me to explain that I suffer from sleep paralysis. And the way sleep paralysis works is that once your brain wakes up, your body is still affected by the sleep. And it takes maybe a minute or two to go away, but it feels like an hour. And if you panic during that time, you can suffer from hallucinations. Back to the story. I was taking a nap, and when I woke up, I couldn't move. I tried to keep it cool and breathe deep, but I saw a shadow over the door getting close to my feet. I tried screaming for help, but my mouth didn't open, and I could feel a hand touching me, and then I was free to move again. When I sat there was no one in the room. I got up to the bathroom, and when I opened the door, there was that shadow on the shower. I screamed. My significant other asked me if I was okay, and I said yes, because it was a shame I thought everything was on my head. The thing is, I had a lot of weird experiences in that house. It wasn't in my head. Anyway, we moved out in 2019, and this house seems okay. This happened some years after that. We lived in this ugly house from 2011 to 2019. It was 2013 or 14, I don't remember, when we got help for the house. A woman, cleaned the house 3 times a week. Used to tell me she listened to people walking upstairs when she was supposed to be alone in the house, or that she saw someone walking by the garden. We had a Doberman and a pit bull at the time. When she was supposed to be alone, it kind of became a joke to my significant other and I, and we named this ghost Louie. Every time something weird happened, we just said, it was Louie. No worries. It was a way to cope with the fear, I guess. Some of the things that happened in the house actually have an explanation. For example, I was learning to play the guitar, acoustic. And in that summer, we started to hear the guitar playing in the middle of the night. The guitar was in the spare bedroom with a lot of things that we didn't use often, and that bedroom was across the hall from our bedroom. One night, I got up, and when I saw the guitar playing by itself, I went there and waited for a few minutes, and nothing. And when I returned, I heard it. So I turned again, and I saw the window's blinds hitting the nightstand because the window was open and the wind moved the blinds. That was it. That was the noise. But there's another thing I can't explain. One night, we were in bed and I was having trouble falling asleep. A thing that seems to help me is to rub my feet one against the other. It relaxes me a lot. So I was doing that for a few minutes until somebody grabbed my foot. I clearly felt the fingers touching me. I jumped on the bed and woke up my significant other. He laughed and said it probably was a bad dream. On another occasion, he fell asleep facing me with his back to the wall, and I was on my phone with my back to him. Suddenly, he jumped and asked me why I had woken him up. I said I didn't, and he said I gave him a tap on the back. Well, it wasn't me. It was Louis. I don't know if Louis was real, or it was the house that was creepy and had us on the edge. But if he was real, he was a nice guy. Nothing really bad ever happened to us there. If something, he made our lives more exciting and gave us stories to share in the night. I was born in Washington, D.C., and lived in an old home in a neighborhood near an area called Mount Pleasant. My parents were renting the basement to a couple who recently came to this country, and their 3 small girls. I was a small child, so I'm remembering the story as it was told by my mother and sister, both now deceased. The story I'm about to tell happened in 1961. One day, the father was supposed to be watching the 3 girls while the mother was at work, and left them unattended while he ran an errand. The eldest girl started a fire, and both the basement and part of the first floor became engulfed in flames. Unfortunately, the 3 girls were killed, and the house sustained enough damage to force my family out until repairs could be made. My parents were working when the fire broke out, and my sister and brother were at the movies. I was being taken care of by my godmother at her house. The house was ultimately repaired, and we moved back in, living there another 3 years before my parents sold it and moved to the suburbs. Years later, I remember my mother telling us a story about the weird occurrences that went on just days prior to the fire. She said that for 3 straight nights before the fire, there was a knocking on our front door during the evening. The weird part was that the screen door was locked, so it would have been impossible for someone to knock on the door itself. My mother and sister also claimed that they remember something knocking on their bedroom doors at night, again for 3 days before the fire. My mother was a very religious woman from Mexico and firmly believed in the paranormal, as did my sister. When I was 4, right before we moved out of the house, my sister, brother and family friend and myself were home one night when scraping noises could be heard coming from downstairs. It sounded like the furniture was being pushed around on the concrete floor. By this time, there was no one living in the basement. The noises became very loud, and we all went running, screaming and crying upstairs. My sister called our neighbour and he called the police. After the basement was searched and nothing out of the ordinary found, everyone left. My sister also said she remembers hearing the laughter of small children when she'd be ironing downstairs. And my dad said he would often get blasts of cold air shooting through him when he was in his workshop down there. We moved out in 1965 and the house is still there. The neighbourhood has gone through a huge transformation, and we've always wondered if those little girls are still there or have finally found peace. First, cemeteries. From my experience, most cemeteries are not haunted by human spirits. I'm usually calm at cemeteries. The only things I have ever noticed in these places are things I could only describe as cryptids. I felt and saw something at a cemetery I can only describe as a goblin of sorts. It had the same feel as a paranormal entity, but was absolutely not human. It's hard to describe that one. From my experience, cemeteries attract non-human entities. Usually, they're benevolent and just linger there for some reason. Morgues are another example of places people assume have spirits. I used to work in a museum that had been a funeral home in the past. The museum was very haunted, but not because it was a funeral home. The spirits there were all either linked to the building originally being a home or linked to items in the home. There was a great spirit in the embalming room, but she was the owner of the home before it was a funeral home. She died in the basement after suffering a stroke. She stayed in that room and hated when we called it the embalming room. When I was a guide, I would straight up tell people, they call this the embalming room, but please don't call it that. There's a spirit here. Her name is Mrs. The name would give away the location, so I'm not including it. Please call it Mrs. Room, or even her room, out of respect for her. Hospitals are a strange case. Typically, spirits linger where they died, but hospitals have such a horrid energy to begin with that it's almost impossible for me to actually find spirits in hospitals, especially ones still in use. I've never seen a spirit in a hospital. I think they have the potential to be haunted, but I've never experienced anything paranormal in a hospital. Places I've learned are frequently haunted are historical museums. Spirits can attach to things from their past, so when one of those things ends up in a museum, the spirit follows. The museum I worked in had 3 human spirits and a non-human entity. From what I've learned, spirits either stay where they died, follow people they cared about, or attach onto something they valued in life. This is why cemeteries and morgues are usually not haunted. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. I'm in the process of getting a camera to make a YouTube channel about being a medium, and I'm working on a book about it as well. If you have any questions about me being a medium, feel free to ask. I'll go ahead and say, mediums are different from psychics. I have to be in the same building as the spirits to interact with it. I cannot call on spirits, and I do not have psychic abilities. About 8 or 9 years ago when I was younger, me and my friend went to a hangout at a park close to his house. No one else was there. Only me and him, and this was my first time being there. There was a small pond, a baseball diamond with a fence, a playground, and it was all surrounded by deep woods. We live in eastern United States. We decided it would be fun to get giant branches and draw stuff in the baseball diamond. Afterwards, we would bang the fence around it for like a couple minutes straight, and it was pretty loud from what I can remember. We then heard wind, but not usual wind, but the sound of wind gusting through the forest behind the pond. This was during summer, if I remember correctly, and there was a lot of foliage, so it was hard to see into the woods clearly. We then heard something big, like horse-sized big, but fast, running through the woods right behind the pond, but along it like it was running around it. I saw a big white creature, seeming to be 7 to 8 feet tall and probably weighing at least 300 pounds. It sounded like a horse running, but lighter. It was super fast. I saw it through the pond weeds. It seemed to have fur, but I couldn't see its legs, head, or if it had a tail, or if there were too many trees and plants in the way. We dropped our sticks and ran to his house, which was in yelling distance, terrified. We told his family. Of course, they didn't believe us. I haven't talked to him in years and just messaged him to see if he remembers. As for the dream I had last night, I was buying old rare artifacts and art from this guy, who showed me this opal slate. I picked it up and said, "Hey, this is my birthstone as I'm born in October." I saw what appeared to be a wolf engraved on each side, but he said it was a Wendigo. I took a closer look, and it looked like a giant skinny pure white wolf, but with a weird shape, elongated head. Scary looking really, and that was the dream. If you Google Wendigo, you will see exactly the creature I saw in the dream, but without the antlers. Like, spot on, but all white. So what I saw that day a Wendigo? Did we summon a Wendigo? Does anyone know anything about this creature or myth/folklore? I didn't see the head or behind as a kid I mentioned, so it could have had antlers and a tail. Any thoughts or insight would be greatly appreciated. I moved into a new house with my family 2 years ago. As soon as I walked in, I felt strange. Like something wasn't right, but I didn't pay attention to it. The first 4 months in the new house passed without anything strange happening. Then all of a sudden, one day, strange things started happening in the house. That same day, my dog started crying for no reason. The iron door of the boiler room in my garden fell off, but it was perfectly sealed. The TV was switching on and off by itself. The lights would turn off without reason. Things started getting scary when I went out of my house into the garden, and I saw a broken bucket full of water. There was a large crack in the bucket surface, but something was holding the water like it was in an intact bucket. As soon as I started staring at it, the water poured out of the bucket through the crack. Since that day, strange things started happening every day. Bottles of wine opening by themselves, doors and windows closing and opening, and their handles rotating as if a person was doing it. I told my story to a friend, and she introduced me to a friend of hers that was really into this sort of thing. I borrowed an EMF meter and a device that translates EVPs to real words from him, and I waited for the right time to use them. Later that day, I turned off the electricity in my house, and I went in every room of my house with the EMF meter. When I entered my bedroom, it rose up to the max level. I turned on the EVP translator and I said, "If you are here, touch this device," pointing at the EMF meter. 1 second later, it rose up to max level again. So I started talking, and the words that showed up on the EVP translator were always correct responses to my questions, never a word without context. So this ghost told me that she's female, that she likes my dog, and that she's interested in knowing me. I stopped talking to her when my mom walked in the room. Since that day, I felt this ghost was following me all day and trying to get my attention by dropping objects that I was watching, causing me to get so scared she would only go away when I was with someone else. She knew that I knew she was there, and she exists, so she was searching for my company. I saw a deodorant bottle falling off a shelf in 2 movements. First it moved close to the border, then stopped, and then it fell off the shelf, so I was sure these events weren't natural. When I was alone, I always felt that she was with me, and every time I felt a strong sense of sadness coming from her. I don't know how to explain this properly. It was like she was really, really sad, and was transmitting her sadness to me. I started ignoring her because I was so scared, and she started to try to get my attention more and more. First, I started seeing shadows and movement with the corner of my eye when I walked alone in the house. Then one day, I saw her shadow on the wall. It was so real that I thought my mom or my sister entered the room. But when I turned my head, I saw that no one was there with me, and only in that moment I realized it was her shadow. I saw her shadow almost every day until 4 days ago, when I left my parents' house and moved to a new city to go to college. She was appearing to me in a more clear way every day, so I think that if I moved out 1 or 2 weeks later, I would have seen her directly somehow. Something weird happens in my house every day. Unopened wine bottles open, the metal door of the boiler container slams on the ground even if it was perfectly sealed, chairs falling out of the blue. We learned to live with these events because they started happening 5 months ago. I also have a 6-month-old dog that lives in the house's garden. When he was a puppy, sometimes he started crying and staring at something that wasn't there. Now he's grown up, and he still sees something, but he doesn't cry anymore. When he sees it, he tries to get me in the house and barks at me if I try to go outside. He wants me to stay in the house. Then he goes where he saw something and stays there for 5 to 10 minutes. Then he comes back and he lets me know that it's all safe and that I can go outside now. I've never seen what he does in those 10 minutes because as soon as he hears me going outside, he comes back to get me in. The other day, My father went outside the house and saw a bucket full of water. He used that bucket 1 hour earlier, and it didn't rain, so there was no explanation for the water. He stared at the bucket for 2 seconds, and then it literally exploded in front of him. He also told me that he always had a weird feeling when he goes to the bathroom at night. He feels that someone is watching him. Only my father has these strange feelings, and the weird stuff happens only in front of him. We moved to this house 9 months ago. I lived in the suburbs of a small town in Italy till I was 19. Near my house, there's a dirt road that leads to a small wood. I went to the woods with my friends a lot when I was a kid, to play, explore the woods, and stuff like that. Before entering the woods on the side of the dirt road, there's an unfinished house, and going forward, there's a country house built far from the road, accessible via a small path. I first saw the orb when I was 12 or 13 years old, and I was going to the wood on bicycles with my friends. We decided to stop and explore the unfinished house on the side of the road, so we went inside, but there was nothing interesting. Just an empty house, and we decided to leave. Before going out of the house, I noticed some stairs that were leading to the first floor. My friends were already on the road, ready to go except for one of them that was still in the house with me. I asked him to wait for me as I was going upstairs to see what was there. I was a little scared because the first floor was dark, but I decided to go there anyway. I took 2 steps and I saw something on the last step. It was a new bouquet. It looked like someone brought it the same day and decided to dump it there. At that point, I was very scared and unsure to move forward. I took 2 to 3 more steps and I was able to see a room on the right. Inside the room there was the orb, a small white orb with a light inside floating, but it wasn't a normal LED light. The light wasn't propagating. It wasn't enlightening anything. It was contained in this small orb that wasn't moving at all. I ran downstairs and outside as soon as I saw it, and never talked to it about my friends fearing that they could have made fun for me. Time passed and I forgot about that event. When I was 15, I started smoking weed, so I usually went to the woods alone to smoke in peace. Nothing ever happened in the woods, so it didn't scare me, even though the house did. So every time I went to the woods, I ran when I was passing by the house, and then forgot about it. But someday I decided to explore the country house. I was high and taking everything very lightly, so I went into the house from the front door. It was another empty house. The windows were open, so it wasn't even dark. But one room wasn't like the others. It's the room with the big door that you can see on the side of the country house. The floor and the walls in that room were burned and totally black. There was a gas tank on the floor with some gasoline still inside. And on one wall, there was a small opening leading to a very little and totally dark room, like 5 by 1.5 meters. This little room was also burned, and on the ground, there were a pair of children's shoes. Suddenly, the fear comes in, but it was nothing compared to the one I felt when I looked outside. In the middle of the countryside, between the country house and the abandoned one, there was the same orb that I saw years before. I've never ran faster than I did then in my life. Until a year ago, when I was 18. I was hanging out on a summer night with 2 friends of mine. We were bored, so we decided to go into the woods that night. I started to be very scared, and my friends started making fun of me. But I wasn't scared of the darkness. I was scared of the orb. We parked the car at the end of the paved road and decided to walk the rest of the way. We passed by the abandoned house, and it was there. It was the orb standing in the middle of the countryside. It was the first time I saw it at night, and it was different because it wasn't just a circular light. Behind the light, there was the silhouette of a child. I couldn't see the face or the rest of the body, just a white, thin silhouette. And this time my friends saw it too, because they started to run, and so did I. I don't live there anymore. Got a high school degree and went to university in a big city. But if I was there, I would have taken pics to show you the house, the burned room, the shoes and everything. If anyone lives near there and wants to go check, you'll see exactly what I described. I've had trouble sleeping since then, and that orb haunts my dreams and my life. This happened 9 years ago when I was just a 13-year-old kid. Before I tell you what happened, you need to understand the layout of my former house. We moved out. Imagine the letter T and the inverted version of it. Then join them together at the vertical line. The vertical line is the hallway, and there are 2 rooms at the top facing each other. At the bottom, there's 1 bedroom and 1 bathroom facing each other, and there's my room between them facing the hallway. I always had a sleeping problem, so I was wide awake at 3 a.m. I was watching the dark hallway like I usually do when I couldn't sleep. But on that particular night, I was more restless and felt like something was very wrong. The feeling of uneasiness sat in the pit of my stomach. It was like I was waiting for something horrifying to happen, and it was inevitable. Whilst my unease was getting stronger and stronger and I could feel pain stemming from dread, I suddenly saw my mom walking out of the bedroom and towards the bathroom area. I was overcome with relief. I even heard the noise of the bathroom door handle. It was old and loose, so it made a jingling sound. I got up and out of the bed to talk to her so that I could calm down. But when I walked past the door frame and saw that the bathroom area was completely empty, I was frozen in place. Words can't even describe the horror I felt. I had goosebumps all over my body. I also felt like cold water was splashed down my head. I stood there, unable to turn my back to the dark hallway, and glanced at the bedroom. My mum and dad were sleeping peacefully, unaware of what just happened to me. Somehow, I found the strength to walk back to my bed, got under the covers while shaking from fear. I don't remember falling asleep. Maybe I passed out from fear. Even to this day, even after 9 years, I'm sure that I saw what was identical to my mom. Her curly and shiny black hair was what made me feel sure it was my mom. What I failed to realise was that my mom didn't have a completely white set of pyjamas, and that thing was wearing it. As I've said at the beginning, this is just one of the many things that happened to me in that house, and it's not limited to that place. It's like something always followed me. Even my sister witnessed it happening 2 or 3 times. I have no idea though. So this happened when I was in elementary school, probably in the 1st or 2nd grade. We lived in a 2-story house, and most of the bedrooms and kitchen were on top floor. The bedroom in question was at the end of the hall on the 2nd floor. It was the kids' playroom. It had some toys and a game console. I always had an eerie feeling whenever I went in that room, but at the time, I was afraid of the dark, so I didn't think anything of it. After long enough of playing there, I could kind of ignore it, but didn't really like being in there alone, or with the lights off. One evening I fell asleep there, and I don't know why, because I normally don't stay there when my siblings leave. I might have been playing the PlayStation. I remember waking up in the middle of the night and looking around, and I noticed something waving in the window. There was what I thought was this blanket with a weird pattern on it, slowly, ethereally, waving, covering the whole outside of the window. It was waving too slow to be the wind, like it was in slow motion. Being on the 2nd floor, there was nothing outside that window, and because of a big yard, there weren't trees near the house. I ran straight to my room and jumped under the covers. I woke up the next day in my room, and when it was light out, I went to see if the blanket thing was still there, and it wasn't. And there wasn't anything I thought it could be when I looked outside. I avoided going in that room for the following week or so, and eventually I just asked to move the PlayStation into my room, since I was the only one who really used it at that point. Has anyone heard of anything like this? This happened to me about 10 years ago. At the time, I lived in an apartment with my mom and one of my older sisters. One day, my sister arrived home with a gift from a friend who went to visit Cuba. The gift were three ceramic dolls that resembled traditional African women. At the time, I used to use my laptop in the living room because the internet was wired. I started to hear a doorknob every night. The sound was like if someone was trying to open a door, but the door was locked. After a week of hearing this sound every night, I went to the hallway, turned the lights on, and stay there to see where the sound comes from. When the knob of my mom's room started to move, I didn't understand why she was doing this every night and never said anything. With the knob still moving, I opened the door and my mom was on her bed and asked me why I kept doing that every night. I was shocked. I just closed the door and went to sleep. The next thing that started to happen was that while I was sleeping, I felt like someone or something was sitting on the opposite side of my bed. The weight was so great that I had to make an effort to avoid rolling to the other side of the bed. When this happened, I was so scared that I just pretended to be asleep until everything went back to normal. This happened for weeks every night. Then it started to intensify. My bed began to shake from right to left violently. It was as if that thing wanted me to wake up. But being petrified of fear, I just wrapped myself up completely and started to pray that everything would stop. Then, the sleep paralysis began. That had never happened to me before. My body simply stopped responding to my orders and my mind was fully awake. At that moment, I began to feel something approaching me. My body began to vibrate as that comes close to me, and I felt like he or it was resting on top of me. Literally what I felt is that he or it wanted to possess my body. The only thing I could do was pray, without stopping for a second. It usually stopped after what for me was about 5 minutes. This happened for months, and I never had the courage to seek help. Who would believe that some paranormal entity was trying to possess my body every night? I investigated on my own the protection prayers that I could use and memorized them. This was wearing me out physically and emotionally. I couldn't sleep, and I felt that when that thing was getting closer to me, I never associated any of this with the dolls that my sister had given me. Until one day, I was so tired and upset with the situation that I was filled with anger, and when the sleep paralysis ended, I sat on my bed and opened my eyes. At that moment, I saw a tall shadow in the shape of a man and without any facial expression walking in front of my bed. I just thought of yelling at him to get out of my house, but when I opened my mouth, all I did was yell. I don't know how my mother and sister didn't wake up. When I yelled, that thing stopped. He turned to look at me and then continued walking and left the room. After that, my fear changed to anger. And in my room, I talked to that and told him that I wasn't going to allow him to possess me and that this was my house. After that, the encounters and paralysis began to decrease until one day, everything suddenly stopped. I didn't understand why everything stopped until a couple of years later. Note, my sister felt something wrong about the dolls and threw them away, but that didn't stop the occurrences. After like 2 years, I was talking with my other sister. I have two sisters. One used to live with me when all this happened, and the other lives in a different house with her daughter. I started to tell her what happened to me with this presence when she stopped me and told me that the same thing happened to her and my niece. Well, this is what happened. My niece, 3 years old at the time, started to have nightmares and told my sister that the black man didn't let her sleep. My sister thought it was just my niece's imagination and didn't think much about it until she saw it herself. She called a friend who has a gift and she told her that a doll in the house was the problem. She was going to dump the doll, but the housekeeper told my sister that she wanted the doll for her daughter. My sister warned her about what was happening with the doll, but she said that she didn't believe in such things. Well, long story short, her daughter started seeing the same black figure, and they ended up burning the doll and throwing the remaining ashes to the river. Everything suddenly stopped because my niece took the doll to her house, And that presence arrived from Cuba in the two African figures and attached itself to that Raggedy Ann doll. Ever since I was in my late teens, I'm 30 now, people who have wronged me have either died or had terrible lives. Now, these people are only people that have victimized me. If I have a grudge with someone, but our relationship isn't friendly because we both wronged each other, nothing happens to those people. But if the person has wronged me, or I can see that the world is better off without that person, they die in a strange, untimely way. Examples: Celeste, a 20-something-year-old girl, spread rumours about me in high school, died of an overdose. Matt was trying to sexually assault a drunk friend of mine when we were 14, and I had to punch him in the kidney to get him off her. Dead at 18, drug overdose. Ryan, a compulsive liar. We couldn't stand each other. Dead at 26, self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. Alex stole my dad's beer when I had a party, took advantage of younger girls and stole things from people constantly. Dead, 19, drug overdose. Mike, compulsive liar, total leech on his family's finances and emotions. Dead, 27, drug overdose. Mike's girlfriend Nikki, 4 years before she ever met Mike, messaged me on Facebook offering to give me a blowjob for $20 so she could pay her court fees. Knowing she was a drug addict, I offered to take the day off work, drive her to court and pay her court fees. She never responded. Dead, 30, drug overdose. Nick was a mean guy to some people, big and intimidating. Didn't do anything to me personally, but I just had a feeling the world would be better off without him. Dead, 34, stabbed in the chest at a bar by a rival biker gang. John, compulsive liar, user of most of his friends. Blew his eyeball out with a mortar at a 4th of July party. There are more. I just can't think of them at the moment. A lot more. It happens so often most of the time, I forget about it. I've had other strange experiences happen to me also, where I guess things about people almost as a joke. One time, on the way to a party, me and my girlfriend were poking fun at her friend Terry because he's an overly enthusiastic fireman who drinks and drives too often. At the party, a guy I never met before in a town I rarely visit had a broken leg. I said to the guy, "Hey buddy, not to be rude, but how did you break your leg?" He told me he was trying to stop his firefighter friend from drinking and driving and stepped in a pothole. As a joke, I looked at my girlfriend and said, "Oh, was his name Terry?" His face went pure white and he said, yeah? Why are you asking me if someone already told you?" My girlfriend had to walk away. She was so startled. Terry was not at the party. I don't know why this happens. I don't wish these things on people. Most of the time it happens, I haven't thought about the person in years, and I don't usually find out about their death until months later. To many people, keeping your arms and legs under the blankets keeps the monsters under your bed. To many, sleeping with your back to a wall keeps the monsters inside the closet. Sometimes, though, the monsters don't follow the rules. I was about 9 years old when this tale began. My sister and I were still sharing a bedroom. We each had a twin-sized bed. Mine was in the southwest corner, next to the closet and just across from the door. My sister was in the opposite corner of mine. Both our beds pointed towards the door. Our house was a typical 60s style house. 2 floors and a basement with dark wood paneling on the walls. The top floor had 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. My parents' bedroom had a walk-in closet and a larger bathroom. The other 2 closets had the sliding doors and not much room inside them. My sister and I shared the bathroom in the upstairs hallway as well. As most children do, we feared the utility room in the basement. Sometimes we'd hear creaking from the furnace or creaking in the walls, and our first thought was ghosts. Most of the time, that's all it was. Just a creaky old house. Until one time, it wasn't. This night was just like any other. I've always had trouble falling asleep as a kid. I still do. My sister and I slept with our bedroom door open. The bathroom we shared was just around the corner in our short hallway. I was laying there on my bed, looking at the ceiling, telling myself stories until I fell asleep, as I had every night before this one. And then I heard something rooting around in the bathroom's trash can. I knew it wasn't Diamond, our blonde Shih Tzu. Even at that age, I knew she was too proud of a dog to root around in children's trash. I lay there, wondering what it could be, my imagination running wild about the ghosts we believed live in our basement. The next morning, I told my parents and my sister what I had heard. Of course, they all dismissed it as the dog in the trash, even though we all knew better. It happened several more times over the following few weeks. Each time, I'd tell my parents and my sister. Each time, my parents would dismiss it as our proud Shih Tzu. My sister, only 8 at the time, became less and less convinced that it was the dog. Perhaps my arguments that Diamond never had any interest in trash during the day were startling to make sense to her. Now, this part is something that I have repressed. My sister claims that one night, I decided to get up and find out what it was that was digging through our trash can. I never described it to her, but I had told her I was going to look at it and declared the next morning that it was not, in fact, our proud little Shih Tzu. This was again met with, "Oh, it's just your imagination," from our parents, and my sister and I let it go. After all, it never caused us any harm, except for scaring me so much that I can no longer recall going into the bathroom that night. The bathroom creature continued to snuffle around in there irregularly for the next few weeks. During this time, my parents decided to repaint our room using a technique they saw on HGTV. They let us pick the colours. I chose purple, and my sister chose a reddish pink colour. The technique was going to take a couple days for my parents to finish, so we helped them move our dressers, nightstands and bookcase out of our bedroom and into the spare room. We took apart the bed frames and moved them into the spare room too. The only pieces of furniture left were the Guinea's pig stands and our mattresses, which we made up with blankets to sleep on for the time being. My parents started painting. First, they primed it. Then, they let that dry air out so my sister and I could sleep safely for the night. The next day, they started using a sponge to apply the pink and purple colours my sister and I had chosen, in artful flowers reminiscent of Monet, all over the walls, one wall at a time. Each afternoon, they would open the windows and turn on the fans to get rid of the paint fumes. They'd move our mattresses back into place, and we would go to bed. It took several days for it to be completed. The second to last night, my sister and I were supposed to sleep on our mattresses. We were both a little sad that we only had a couple nights left to do this. The novelty of our current sleeping arrangements hadn't worn off yet. We went off to bed, and I once again found myself laying there, unable to think, trying to tell myself stories and count sheep. A couple hours passed. I heard my parents come up the stairs and go to their room for the night. I could see the light of their TV bouncing off the walls of the hallway. Diamond the Shih Tzu decided to sleep with us for the night and came into our room, jumping onto my sister's mattress opposite mine. Another hour passed. My parents turned their TV off. I sighed as I rolled onto my left side, putting my back to the small gap between my mattress and the wall. I looked out the window at the neighbour's house and remembered all the times they would let us see their pool. I started hearing a slight clicking sound coming from downstairs. This was new. It was as if someone was tapping a pen on the hardwood floors in the kitchen. I ignored it. Never heard of it before, but it was an old house. It creaked. Several more hours passed. This was going to be another sleepless night. I considered getting up and having my mom make me warm milk again, but I never got the chance. There was a snort behind her, between my back and the wall. Instinct took over and my body froze in place. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand straight up, and I felt goosebumps on my folded arms. I faced the room, my back to the wall. There was a small gap, maybe a foot at most, between my mattress and the wall. And something was now occupying that gap, near the top of the mattress. It continued snorting like a warthog. I could hear it sniffing our carpet and snorting as it sniffed my mattress. I felt it nudge the mattress with its nose. I didn't dare move. This was definitely not our little Shih Tzu. Whatever it was made its way down the hall towards our open bedroom door. I thought maybe it would leave. Maybe it would go back into the bathroom and go away. I prayed it would. I feared it could hear my heart pounding in my chest and would eat me. It got to the end of my mattress, but it didn't go through the open door. No. Instead it turned, and at the end of my mattress suddenly compressed under the weight. I pulled my feet towards my chest, away from the thing, terrified of touching it. I felt it sniff the mattress with whatever it used as a nose, snorting the whole time. It got to the end of my mattress, but it didn't go through the open door. No. Instead, it turned. And the end of the mattress suddenly compressed under a weight. I pulled my feet towards my chest, away from the thing, terrified of it touching me. I felt a sniff with the mattress with whatever it used as a nose, snorting the whole time. Slowly, it pulled itself up onto the mattress, closer to me. I couldn't pull my feet any closer to my head. I started breathing heavily, fearing that this was the end. But then it pulled away. It smoothly slid off the mattress, and I heard the snorting fade as it left our room. I don't know where it went. I didn't get us to follow it. Soon, the clicking noise started up again in our kitchen below us. I could hear it reverberating up our stairwell. I told my family the next day. To my exasperation, I was met with the same indifference as before. But my sister stopped eating her breakfast and just stared at me, her blue eyes wide in her freckled face. She chimed in that she had heard snorting last night too, but thought she was dreaming. The next night came. My sister and I settled into our beds, wondering what fresh horror tonight would bring. We both lay there, awake. Our parents came up to bed an hour after we did. We could see the glow of their TV bouncing down the short hallway. A couple hours later, they turned their TV set off. Diamond came into our room to sleep with us. I heard her soft tail as she jumped onto my sister's mattress. "Are you awake?" I whispered into the darkness. "Yeah," came the reply. We waited for what felt like an eternity. But eventually, I heard it clicking noises downstairs, as if someone was tapping a plastic pen against our hardwood floor in the kitchen. Then my body froze again. My hair stood up again. I lay facing the room, and it was behind me again. This time, it wasn't snorting so loudly, but it sniffed my mattress, sniffed the wall, sniffed the carpet. Without the snorting, I could hear something heavy sliding across the carpeted floor, between my mattress and the wall. It reached the end of my mattress, and I felt it pushing at the corner with its nose. "Reese," I hissed at my sister. She didn't answer. I whispered towards the mattress, and very slowly propped my head into my hand. I glanced at the foot of my bed. It was dark, but with the headlights in the hallway and from the street lamp outside of the window, I could see a large black snake-like mass slithering around my mattress, towards the centre of the room. It stopped and lifted its head up, much like a cobra would, and the pointed part of its head was pointed towards the guinea pig cage. "Reese," I whispered loudly. "Yeah," came a faint reply. "Do you see it?" "Yeah," she whispered again. "What?" I began to speak in a normal voice, no longer whispering. But that was a mistake. The creature slammed itself into my sister's mattress, lifting up one corner and pushing it and its occupants into the wall nearest them. The dog took off. How she got past that thing, I'll never know. We started screaming for our parents. I didn't know what they would do about these giant spirit cobra that we had had for at least months. At least they saw it too. They'd know if I'd been telling the truth. The creature suddenly was gone. We don't know what happened to it, but believe it went into our closet. My parents turned on our light, saw my sister's mattress in disarray, one end towards the wall. We started telling them what happened. They looked over my sister and found a red mark on her shoulder where she hit the wall. They looked for the dog and found her trembling under the bed. The thing never came back to our room, but over the next few weeks, I could hear it rooting around in our trash can at night. That slowly stopped. And then I heard it clicking something on the hardwood floors for years after that. We never saw it again, but I knew it never left. I reconstructed this story from interviewing my sister and my parents. I've actually repressed part of this, and she's repressed others. Everything you just read is true. I spent the next 20 years trying to figure out what was going on, but alas, Google has failed me, and our story seems to be unique. So now I ask you for help. Has anyone heard of anything like this before? Is this some sort of cryptid, interdimensional being, or a ghost? In summer of 2008, I moved into a communal living house in Lawrence, Kansas, named the Sunflower House. In this order, the house had been a Civil War hospital, the first hospital in Lawrence, a nursing home, and finally a communal living house. After being there for a month or so, I began feeling uneasy at night and started reading my Bible before bed. I'm not sure why, it just seemed like the thing to do. A few nights after beginning this, I was asleep, when I slowly awoke to a pressure on my chest, making me unable to move. There was something whispering seemingly in both ears at once. It took a little time to come to my senses and understand what it was saying. It was telling me things like, "You're worthless, you'll never be anything, no one loves you," etc., etc., with much more profanity. I was now conscious but unable to open my eyes. I'm not sure how long this was happening before I shouted, "Get the fuck off me," while simultaneously jumping out of the bed. There was an entity hovering around 3 feet in front of me, about 5 feet off the ground. It was spherical, maybe the size of a basketball with eyes all over it. I would compare it to Beholder in D&D, or the eyeball monster in Big Trouble in Little China. In a state of shock and anger, I lunged at the entity thinking I was going to beat its ass. It shot through my bedroom door with me on its tail. As I popped out into the hallway, it was zipping away, roughly about 15 to 20 feet in front of me. It made a sharp left into our bathroom, the door slamming behind it. About this time it dawned on me, what the fuck was that? I found myself standing in the hallway in nothing but my underwear, somewhere in the middle of the witching hour. Scared and bewildered, I thought it best not to investigate the bathroom and went back to my room, falling back asleep maybe 45 minutes later. The next day, I asked my neighbour if he heard anything. He said, "You made a little ruckus early in the morning." I don't recall if I told about the ghost or not. I moved out maybe a month or two afterwards. Strangely, I never worried about it after that night. I felt like I scared the shit out of that thing, and it wasn't coming back. I'm not preaching, but I think rolling with JC straight shut it down. I also wonder if I imagined it. I'm sure I was blazed. I've seen some things here and there, but that thing took the cake. Has anyone else encountered an eyeball monster, or scared a spirit?